The morning light from 3 different suns shone through the massive windows of the Galactic Military Academy. The academy sat on Nexus Prime, a space station so large it could hold a small moon inside it. Students from dozens of different worlds walked through the halls, their various shapes and colors making the place look like a living rainbow. Daeho Kim walked quietly among them. He was average height for a human, with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to notice everything. His academy uniform was neat and clean, fitting him perfectly. Other students barely looked at him as he passed. He liked it that way. The classroom was huge, with seats arranged in a circle around a central platform. Daeho took his usual spot in the back corner, away from the other students. He placed his datapad on the desk and waited. His jacket hung, loose on his shoulders, hiding something that made tiny clicking sounds when he moved. Other students filled the room slowly. There was Hye-Jin Park, another human who always tried to sit near Daeho. She had short black hair and bright eyes that missed nothing. Today she looked worried about something. Taemin Lee came in next, a tall human with broad shoulders who served as Daeho's roommate. He waved at Daeho before finding his own seat. The alien students were more interesting to watch. There were the blue-skinned Corvani with their sharp teeth and proud walks. The insect-like Threx clicked and buzzed to each other in their own language. A few gray Voltar sat together, their large eyes never blinking as they stared at their datapads. The room went quiet when Instructor Veltar entered. He was Corvani, standing nearly 8 feet tall with dark blue skin covered in small scales. His eyes were yellow with black slits down the middle like a snake. Scars ran across his arms and face, telling stories of old battles. When he walked, his boots made heavy sounds on the metal floor. "Today we study military history," Veltar said, his voice deep and rough. "We will learn about the great warrior races of our galaxy, the brave Corvani who never retreat, the fierce Threx who fight until death, the smart Voltar who plan perfect battles." He pressed a button, and images appeared in the air above the platform. Pictures of great space battles, armies marching across, alien worlds, and flags of victory flying over conquered cities. "These are the races that understand war," Veltar continued. "They know that strength wins battles. They know that fear defeats enemies. They know that only the strong deserve to rule." Daeho listened without moving. His face showed no emotion as the instructor spoke. Inside his jacket, something small and metal shifted slightly, making the smallest sound. "But not all races understand war," Veltar said, and his yellow eyes found the human students. "Some races are too weak, too soft, too foolish to be real warriors." The alien students turned to look at the humans. Some smiled in ways that were not friendly. Others made small sounds that might have been laughter. "Humans," Veltar said, the word like it tasted bad. "A failed warrior species. They have been in space for only a few hundred years. In that short time, they have lost every major war they fought." Hye-Jin Park's hands made fists on her desk. Taemin Lee's jaw became tight. But Daeho did not move. He just watched and listened. "Humans are too emotional," Veltar explained. "They make decisions with their hearts instead of their heads. They show mercy to enemies who should be destroyed. They retreat when they should attack. They negotiate when they should conquer." The instructor walked around the platform as he spoke. His movements were smooth and dangerous like a hunting animal. The worst human weakness is their inability to commit to total war. Real warriors understand that war is about destruction, about showing enemies that resistance is useless. But humans always hold back. They worry about innocent people. They care about property damage. They want to minimize casualties. A Threx student made a clicking sound that was clearly laughter. "They sound pathetic," the insect said in broken galactic standard. "Exactly," Veltar agreed. "This is why humans have never won a significant interstellar conflict. They simply do not have the warrior spirit needed for real combat." Daeho shifted in his seat, and again, there was the tiny sound of metal touching metal from inside his jacket. He caught Hye-Jin looking at him with concern. She had noticed that he never spoke during these lectures, never defended humanity like the other human students did. "Let me give you examples," Veltar said. The Vorthon Rebellion 12 years ago. Human forces were sent to help the Galactic Council. They arrived late, used too few ships, and spent most of their time trying to minimize damage to civilian areas. The rebellion lasted 3 times longer than it should have. So Young Choi, a human student with engineering skills, raised her hand. Instructor, I read that the rebellion ended with minimal civilian casualties and the rebel leaders agreed to peaceful negotiations. Isn't that a good result? Veltar's laugh was harsh. Peaceful negotiations? Child, the rebels should have been crushed completely. Their leaders should have been executed as examples. Instead, humans allowed them to keep some of their territory and gave them seats in the local government. This is not victory. This is weakness disguised as mercy. The Outer Rim conflicts 5 years ago, Veltar continued. Pirates had taken control of dozens of systems. The Galactic Council sent human forces to deal with them. Did the humans hunt down every pirate ship? Did they destroy every pirate base? No. They captured a few leaders, destroyed some bases, and then offered the rest jobs in the merchant marine. More alien laughter filled the room. A Voltar student spoke up. They turned criminals into workers? How strange. Strange and weak, Veltar agreed. A proper warrior race would have made examples. They would have left burning wrecks as warnings to others. Instead, humans treated pirates like misguided children who just needed better jobs. Daeho continued to sit quietly, but something in his eyes had changed. They were still calm, but now they seemed to be measuring the instructor, calculating something. This is why humans will never be a major military power, Veltar concluded. They lack the will to do what war requires. They cannot make the hard choices that victory demands. They are too concerned with being liked to be truly feared. Class period was almost over. Students began gathering their materials and preparing to leave. But Veltar held up a hand. Tomorrow we will have practical exercises, he announced. You will work in teams to solve military scenarios. This will show you the difference between proper warrior thinking and human weakness. As students filed out of the classroom, Hyejin walked over to Daeho. Are you okay? She asked quietly. You never say anything when he talks like that about us. Daeho stood and gathered his datapad. Inside his jacket, the hidden metal pieces shifted again with a soft clicking sound. Sometimes it's better to listen, he said simply. You learn more that way. Taemin joined them as they walked toward the door. I don't know how you stay so calm, he said. If I have to listen to much more of his garbage, I'm going to say something I shouldn't. Daeho looked back at Instructor Veltar, who was reviewing his notes for the next class. Maybe tomorrow will be different, he said quietly. None of them noticed the small smile that crossed his face as they left the room. The next morning came too early for most students, but Daeho was already awake when his alarm sounded. He had been sitting by the window, watching ships come and go from the station's docking bays. His roommate Taemin was still sleeping, so Daeho dressed quietly. As he put on his jacket, the hidden metal pieces made their soft clicking sound again. The tactical simulation room was different from their usual classroom. Banks of computers lined the walls and large screens showed star maps and ship movements. The center of the room had several workstations where teams could plan their strategies. Everything looked serious and military, like a real command center. Students entered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. The alien students seemed excited about the exercise. The Corvani students walked with their usual proud stride. The Threx clicked and buzzed with anticipation. Even the normally quiet Voltar seemed more alert than usual. Instructor Veltar stood at the front of the room, arms crossed over his broad chest. His yellow eyes scanned the students as they found their seats. When everyone was ready, he began to speak. Today you will prove your understanding of military strategy, he announced. You will work in mixed teams to solve tactical problems. These scenarios are based on real conflicts from galactic history. He pressed controls on his datapad, and the main screen showed a star system with several planets. One planet was highlighted in red. This is Colony World Gamma 7, Veltar explained. A civilian population of 50,000 people. The colony produces rare minerals needed for starship construction. Enemy forces are approaching to capture the planet. The students leaned forward, interested in the details. This looked like a real military problem, not just classroom theory. Your job is to defend the colony, Veltar continued. You have limited resources, limited time, and limited personnel. The enemy force is much larger than your defensive force. Some of you will succeed. Most of you will fail. He divided the class into 6 teams of 5 students each. The teams were mixed, with humans and aliens working together. Daeho found himself grouped with Hyejin Park, So-young Choi, Min-ho Song, and a Voltar student named Kexlar. Each team gets a different scenario, Veltar announced. The basic situation is the same, but the details change. Some teams will have more ships, some will have better weapons, some will have more time to prepare. The teams moved to their workstations and received their specific assignments. Daeho's team gathered around their screen and read their scenario. Min-ho Song, who was good with tactical planning, whistled softly. This is not fair, he said quietly. Look at what we have to work with. Their scenario was clearly the hardest. 1. They had only 5 small patrol ships to defend against 50 enemy warships. The colony had no orbital defenses and only basic ground weapons. They had 12 hours before the enemy arrived, but no reinforcements were coming. The enemy has destroyers, cruisers, and a battleship, So-young said, checking the technical details. Our patrol ships have light weapons and basic shields. This is impossible. Kexlar, the Voltar student, examined the data with his large, unblinking eyes. The mathematical probability of success is less than 2%, he stated in his mechanical AO voice. This scenario is designed for failure. At other workstations, teams were already making plans. The alien students seemed confident, drawing up battle formations and attack strategies. Their plans involved direct combat, overwhelming firepower, and glorious last stands. Hyejin looked frustrated. Why did we get the impossible scenario? It's like the instructor wants us to fail. Maybe he does, Daeho said quietly. His teammates looked at him in surprise. It was the first time he had spoken since the exercise began. What do you mean? Min-ho asked. Daeho was studying their tactical display, but his eyes seemed to be seeing something the others missed. Look at the other scenarios. The Corvani team has 20 ships against 30 enemies. The Threx team has orbital defense platforms. Our scenario is much harder. So what do we do? So-young asked. Veltar said most teams will fail. Maybe we're supposed to fail and learn from it. No, Daeho said, and there was something different in his voice now. Something certain and calm. We're going to win. The others stared at him. Kexlar tilted his large head to one side. The mathematics disagree with your conclusion, the Voltar said. Mathematics don't account for everything, Daeho replied. He sat down at the planning station and began pulling up detailed information about the colony, the enemy forces, and the surrounding space. What are you thinking? Hyejin asked, moving closer to watch what he was doing. I'm thinking about what the instructor said yesterday, Daeho explained. He said humans always lose because we're too emotional, too merciful, too unwilling to do what war requires. So? Min-ho said. So maybe that's not a weakness, Daeho continued. Maybe that's a strength we just need to use differently. For the next hour, Daeho worked at the computer while his teammates watched. He pulled up information about the colony's geography, its industrial facilities, and its civilian population. He studied the enemy fleet composition and movement patterns. He examined the patrol ship's capabilities in detail. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. It was not like any of the strategies the other teams were developing. There were no grand battle lines, no heroic last stands, no overwhelming firepower. Instead, it was subtle and complex, using the enemy's strengths against them. This is very unusual, Kexlar observed. You are not planning to fight the enemy fleet directly. Fighting them directly would be suicide. Daeho agreed. 50 ships against 5 ships? We would lose in minutes. Then how do we win? So-young asked. Daeho smiled, and for a moment his teammates saw something different in his eyes, something experienced and confident. We make them think they're winning while we're actually achieving our real objectives. He began explaining his strategy. It involved dividing their small force, using the colony's industrial facilities in unexpected ways, and turning the civilian population from a liability into an asset. The plan required precise timing, careful coordination, and a deep understanding of how enemy commanders think. "This is either brilliant or completely crazy," Minho said when Daeho finished explaining. "Maybe both," Hyejin added. At the front of the room, Instructor Veltar was walking between the teams, checking their progress. When he reached Daeho's team, he looked at their tactical display with obvious disapproval. "What is this?" he demanded. "Where are your battle formations? Where is your fire plan? This looks like a retreat strategy." "It's an asymmetric defense plan," Daeho replied calmly. "We're using mobility and deception instead of direct firepower." Veltar's scaled face showed contempt, typical human thinking. "You're already planning to run away instead of fight. This is exactly the weakness I was talking about yesterday." "Maybe," Daeho said. "We'll find out when we run the simulation." The instructor looked at the plan again, then made a dismissive sound. "You cannot win battles by avoiding them. Real warriors stand and fight even against overwhelming odds. They win through courage and strength, not through clever tricks and running away. Sometimes the clever trick is the only way to protect what matters," Daeho replied quietly. Veltar stared at him for a long moment. There was something in the human's calm confidence that seemed to annoy him. "We shall see," the instructor said finally. "When your strategy fails, perhaps you will understand what real warfare requires." As Veltar moved on to check other teams, So Young whispered to Daeho, "Are you sure about this? He's going to be really angry if we mess up." "I'm sure," Daeho said. Inside his jacket, the hidden metal pieces shifted slightly as he leaned forward to make final adjustments to their plan. The time for planning was almost over. Soon they would run their simulations and see which strategies worked. Around the room, other teams were putting finishing touches on their battle plans. Most involved direct combat and heroic sacrifices. Only Daeho's team had chosen a different path. Only they were betting that sometimes the best way to win a war was to fight it in a way the enemy never expected. "Simulation begins in 5 minutes, Veltar announced. "Prepare to see which of you understand real military strategy." Daeho checked their plan one more time, then leaned back in his chair. "Ready?" he asked his teammates. They nodded, though they still looked nervous. They were about to find out if human military thinking was really as weak as their instructor claimed. The simulation room filled with tension as the tactical exercises began. Large screens around the room showed different scenarios playing out in real time. Each team's workstation displayed their specific situation with moving dots representing ships, planets, and military units. "Simulation begins now, Instructor," Veltar announced. "You have 4 hours of simulated time to complete your objectives. Remember, the enemy is approaching and will not wait for you to perfect your strategies." At the first workstation, the Corvani team immediately launched their ships in a direct assault formation. Their strategy was simple and aggressive. Meet the enemy head-on and destroy them through superior firepower and tactics. The simulation showed their 20 ships forming battle lines and charging toward the approaching enemy fleet. The Threx team took a different approach. They positioned their ships around the orbital defense platforms and waited for the enemy to come to them. Their plan relied on making the enemy attack fortified positions while taking heavy casualties from the defensive weapons. Daeho's team watched their own simulation begin. The enemy fleet of 50 ships was approaching Colony World Gamma 7 in standard attack formation. The 5 human patrol ships looked tiny compared to the massive enemy force. "Phase 1, Daeho said quietly to his teammates. "Execute dispersal pattern." So Young Choi worked at the controls, sending commands to their simulated ships. Instead of forming a defensive line, the 5 patrol ships scattered in different directions. 2 ships headed toward the outer planets of the system. 1 ship moved behind a large asteroid field. The other 2 ships took positions near the colony world but stayed hidden behind its moons. "This looks like cowardice," Kexlar observed. "We appear to be running away." "That's the idea," Daeho replied. "Let them think we're afraid." On the main display, Instructor Veltar was watching all the simulations simultaneously. When he saw Daeho's team dispersing their forces, he made a sound of disgust. "Already running," he muttered loud enough for nearby students to hear. Exactly what I expected from human strategy. In the simulation, the enemy fleet reached the colony system and began scanning for defensive forces. They detected the scattered patrol ships and sent pursuit groups after them. This divided the enemy fleet into smaller groups exactly as Daeho had planned. Phase 2, Daeho announced. Begin harassment operations. The 2 patrol ships near the outer planets began hit-and-run attacks on the enemy pursuit groups. They would appear suddenly, fire a few shots, then disappear behind planets or into asteroid fields. They were not trying to destroy enemy ships. They were trying to confuse and frustrate them. Meanwhile, the ship hidden in the asteroid field was doing something completely different. Instead of fighting, it was placing small devices throughout the asteroid belt. The devices looked like emergency beacons, but they were actually sophisticated signal transmitters. "What are those supposed to do?" Minho Song asked. "Create phantom fleets," Daeho explained. "In 30 minutes, enemy sensors will start detecting signals that look like hidden ship squadrons. They'll think we have reinforcements hiding throughout the system." At other workstations, the alien teams were deep in conventional battles. The Corvani had engaged the enemy fleet directly and were taking heavy casualties while inflicting significant damage. The Threks were successfully defending their fortified positions, but the enemy was adapting their attack patterns. So far, Daeho's team seemed to be avoiding any real fighting at all. "This is embarrassing," a Corvani student said loudly. "The humans are not even trying to fight. They are just running around like frightened animals." Veltar nodded approvingly at the comment. "This demonstrates exactly what I taught you yesterday. Humans lack the warrior spirit for real combat. They prefer tricks and deception to honest battle." Daeho ignored the comments and focused on the simulation. "Phase 3, he said. "Civilian evacuation begins." This was the most unusual part of their strategy. While the enemy fleet was scattered chasing patrol ships and investigating phantom signals, the colony world began a carefully planned evacuation. Civilian transports started moving people and valuable equipment to hidden shelters and underground facilities. But this was not just about protecting civilians. It was about making the enemy think the humans were abandoning the planet entirely. Enemy sensors detected the evacuation ships and reported that the colony was being abandoned. "They think we're giving up," Heejin Park realized. "They think we're evacuating everyone and leaving the planet to them." "Exactly," Daeho confirmed. "Which means they'll move their entire fleet into orbit to begin occupation operations. That's when we spring the real trap." The enemy commander in the simulation was confident now. The human defensive force was scattered and running. The colony was being evacuated. This looked like an easy victory. The enemy fleet reformed and moved toward the planet to begin landing operations. Phase 4, Daeho announced. Industrial assets activated. This was when Daeho's team revealed what they had really been preparing. The colony's mining and industrial facilities had been converted into massive electromagnetic pulse generators. When the enemy fleet moved into close orbit, these ground-based weapons activated simultaneously. The pulse was not strong enough to destroy the enemy ships, but it was powerful enough to disable their weapons and navigation systems temporarily. For a few critical minutes, the 50-ship enemy fleet was helpless in orbit. "Now," Daeho said, "execute final phase." The scattered patrol ships suddenly converged on the disabled enemy fleet, but they were not trying to destroy the ships. They were targeting specific systems, communication arrays, sensor networks, and command structures. Within minutes, the enemy fleet was unable to coordinate their actions or communicate with each other. At the same time, the evacuated civilians revealed themselves to be a hidden resistance force. They seized control of enemy landing parties and captured key enemy personnel, including the fleet commander, who had beamed down to establish occupation headquarters. The simulation ended with the enemy fleet disabled, their command structure captured, and their mission completely failed. Daeho's 5 patrol ships were still operational, the colony was secure, and civilian casualties were minimal. The room went completely silent. On the main display, the results were clear. The Corvani team had achieved a partial victory with heavy losses on both sides. The Threx team had successfully defended their positions but failed to eliminate the enemy threat. Several other teams had failed completely. Only Deho's team had achieved total victory with minimal losses. Instructor Veltar stared at the display for a long moment. His scaled face showed confusion and anger. "There must be an error in the simulation," he said finally. "Run the analysis again." The computer systems checked and rechecked the results. Everything was correct. The human team had successfully defended against overwhelming odds, using a strategy that no one had expected. "How?" demanded a Threx student. "Their force was the smallest. Their scenario was the hardest. How did they win when stronger teams failed?" Deho stood up slowly from his workstation. Inside his jacket, the hidden metal pieces made their soft clicking sound as he moved. "We won because we understood what victory actually means," he said quietly. "Explain," Veltar ordered, his voice harsh with anger and confusion. "The objective was to defend the colony," Deho continued. "Not to destroy the enemy fleet, not to prove our courage, not to achieve military glory, just to protect 50,000 civilian lives and keep the colony producing minerals for the galactic economy." He gestured at the tactical display. "Every other team focused on defeating the enemy through direct combat. We focused on making the enemy's mission impossible to complete. They came to capture a functioning colony with intact facilities and a cooperative population. Instead, they found disabled ships, captured commanders, and a resistance force that knew the terrain better than they did." "But you avoided direct combat," Veltar protested. "You used deception and tricks instead of honest battle." "We used the tools that worked," Deho replied. "Sometimes the best way to win a war is to make sure the fighting never starts. Sometimes victory comes from understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves." So young Choi was looking at Deho with new respect. "You knew this. Would work from the beginning, didn't you? You weren't guessing or hoping, you knew." Deho's calm eyes met hers for a moment. Inside his jacket, something metal shifted slightly. "I had reason to be confident," he said simply. The other students were talking excitedly among themselves, analyzing the strategy and trying to understand how it had worked. The alien student seemed particularly interested, asking detailed questions about the timing and coordination required. But Instructor Veltar was not impressed. His yellow eyes narrowed as he looked at Deho. "This proves nothing," he declared. "Simulations are not real warfare. In actual combat, enemy commanders would not fall for such simple tricks. Real battles require real strength, not clever deceptions." "Maybe," Deho agreed quietly. "But the simulation parameters were based on real conflicts from galactic history. The enemy responses were programmed using actual tactical data from past wars." "Irrelevant," Veltar insisted. "No human force has ever achieved such results in actual combat. This is fantasy, not military science." Deho did not argue. He simply gathered he. The days following the simulation exercise were tense. Word had spread throughout the academy about the human team's unexpected victory, and students were talking about it in hallways and dining areas. Some were impressed by the creative strategy, while others dismissed it as luck or simulation error. Instructor Veltar seemed determined to prove that the human success was meaningless. In every class, he found new ways to criticize human military doctrine. He brought up historical examples of human defeats, analyzed human weaknesses in detail, and repeatedly insisted that real warfare required the kind of strength that humans simply did not possess. The simulation was flawed, he told his students, during their next military history class. Real enemy commanders would never fall for such obvious deceptions. The human strategy only worked because the computer was programmed incorrectly. Yujin Kang, a human student who usually stayed quiet during these lectures, finally raised her hand. "Instructor, have you personally reviewed the simulation programming? The Academy uses the most advanced tactical modeling systems in the galaxy." Veltar's yellow eyes fixed on her with obvious irritation. "Are you questioning my professional judgment, cadet?" I'm asking for clarification, Yujin replied calmly. If the simulation systems are unreliable, shouldn't we be concerned about all our training exercises? Other human students began to speak up as well. Yunseo Huang, who rarely participated in class discussions, stood up from her seat. Instructor, you keep saying that humans have never won real wars, but you never give us specific examples to study. How can we learn from these failures if we don't examine them in detail? Yeah, added Bon Huayun, another human cadet. We've studied plenty of alien military victories in this class. Why don't we study human defeats with the same detail? What exactly did human forces do wrong? Veltar was clearly becoming angry. His scales seemed to darken, and his voice grew louder. Human failures are obvious and do not require detailed study. Humans are weak because they lack the basic warrior instincts that proper military races possess naturally. But what specific battles are you referring to? Yujin pressed. What human commanders made these mistakes? What forces were involved? The instructor slammed his hand on the lecture platform. Enough. I am the military expert in this classroom, not you. I have fought in real battles against real enemies. I have seen what happens when weak races try to play soldier against true warriors. The human students exchanged glances. They had never seen Veltar lose his temper so completely. Even the alien students seemed surprised by his outburst. Daeho had been sitting quietly in his usual back corner seat, watching the exchange without comment. But when Veltar claimed to be a combat veteran, something changed in his expression. His calm eyes became more focused, more calculating. Instructor, Daeho said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the room. What conflicts have you personally participated in? Veltar turned to face him, still angry from the previous questions. That is not relevant to this discussion. Cadet, I think it is, Daeho replied, standing up slowly. You keep telling us about real warfare and real battles. If you fought in them personally, that would give you special authority to teach us about military strategy. Of course I have combat experience, Veltar snapped. Unlike humans, Corvani actually fight when duty calls. Which campaigns? Daeho asked, and there was something different in his tone now. Something that sounded almost like a professional inquiry. Which units did you serve with? What rank did you hold? The question seemed to catch Veltar off guard. He hesitated for a moment before answering. I served with the Corvani 3rd Fleet during border security operations in the Outer Rim territories. Daeho nodded thoughtfully. Border security operations. Were those the anti-piracy campaigns about 5 years ago? Among other duties, Veltar replied, but he seemed less certain now. Those were the operations where human forces also participated, Daeho continued. The ones you mentioned earlier as examples of human weakness. You said humans captured a few pirate leaders and then offered the rest jobs in the merchant marine. Exactly, Veltar said, regaining some of his confidence. A perfect example of human softness in actual combat. Daeho walked closer to the front of the room. With each step there was a faint metallic clicking sound from inside his jacket. Tell me, Instructor, do you remember the final operation in that campaign? The assault on Pirate Station Omega-7? Veltar's expression became wary. I remember it. A joint operation involving multiple species forces. What happened there? Daeho asked. The station was captured, Veltar said carefully. The pirate leadership was eliminated or arrested. By which forces? Daeho pressed. The instructor hesitated again. It was a joint operation, multiple units participated, but which unit actually led the assault? Which unit breached the station's defenses and secured the command center? Veltar's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Around the room, students were leaning forward, sensing that something important was happening. The human unit, Veltar finally admitted reluctantly, but they had superior numbers and better equipment. Did they? Daeho asked. My understanding is that the human force was outnumbered 3-1 and had to assault a heavily fortified position. How would you know the tactical details of that operation? Veltar demanded. Those are classified military records. It was then that Daeho smiled slightly. and something in that smile made several students sit back in surprise. "Maybe I read about it somewhere," he said quietly. Yujin Kang was staring at Daeho intently. Something about his questions and his confidence suggested knowledge that went far beyond textbook study. "Daeho," she said slowly, "how do you know so much about that specific operation?" Before he could answer, Yunseo Huang gasped softly. She was sitting close enough to see that his jacket had shifted slightly as he moved, and something metallic had caught the classroom lights. "What is that?" she whispered. Other students turned to look. There, visible through a gap in his jacket, was the edge of something that definitely was not part of the standard academy uniform. It looked like a small piece of metal with colored ribbon attached to it. "Is that a medal?" Bon Hua-yun asked in amazement. Daeho looked down at his jacket and realized that his careful concealment had finally slipped. The hidden awards were partially visible. For a moment he seemed to be deciding something important. Then he reached up and began to unfasten his jacket. "Cadet Kim, what are you doing?" Veltar demanded, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Answering your questions about human military experience," Daeho replied calmly. As he removed his jacket, the students could see that the inside lining was covered with rows of medals, ribbons, and military decorations. There were dozens of them representing campaigns, battles, and achievements that spanned years of service. The room fell completely silent. Veltar stared at the display of honors, his yellow eyes wide with shock. Several of the medals were ones he recognized, awards that were only given for exceptional courage under fire, for strategic brilliance in combat, or for successful completion of the most dangerous military operations. "My name is Colonel Daeho Kim," he said quietly to the stunned classroom. "I've served in the Galactic Defense Forces for 28 years. I've commanded human units in 14 major campaigns, including the Outer Rim anti-piracy operations, the Vorthan Rebellion, and the Siege of Kepler Station." He paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "I came to this academy not as a student, but as an observer. The Human Defense Ministry wanted to evaluate the quality of military education being provided to galactic forces. Specifically, they wanted to know if anti-human bias was affecting the training of future officers who might serve alongside human units." Veltar's face had gone pale beneath his blue scales. "You're lying," he said weakly. "No human has that kind of service record." Daeho pointed to one particular medal on his jacket. It was golden with a distinctive starburst pattern. "Do you recognize this one, Instructor? It's the Nova Cross. It's awarded to commanders who successfully break enemy sieges while outnumbered at least 5-1. Several alien students made sounds of recognition. The Nova Cross was famous throughout the galaxy. Only a few dozen beings had ever received it. "I earned that one at the Siege of Kepler Station," Daeho continued. "The same battle where human forces broke a 3-year blockade and saved over 2 million civilian lives." He pointed to another medal. "This is the Galactic Service Medal with 4 combat clusters. Each cluster represents a separate campaign where human forces achieved their primary objectives with minimal casualties." Veltar was staring at the medals, as if they were poisonous snakes. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No," Daeho said quietly. "It's just not what you expected to find." The silence in the classroom stretched for what felt like hours. Students stared at Colonel Daeho Kim and the array of medals covering his jacket lining. Instructor Veltar stood frozen behind his lecture platform, his yellow eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Woojin Lim, a human student in the front row, was the first to find his voice. "Colonel," he said quietly, "are those all real?" "Everyone," Daeho replied. He began pointing to specific decorations. "This one is from the defense of Sanctuary Colony. This cluster represents the liberation of the Centauri trade routes. This ribbon is for the successful negotiation of the Vorthan peace accords." A Voltar student named Kekstar leaned forward to examine the medals more closely. "I recognize several of these conflicts from our historical studies," she said in her mechanical voice. "According to our textbooks, humans played minor support roles in most of those campaigns." "Your textbooks are wrong," Deho said simply. In the defensive sanctuary colony, human forces comprised 80% of the defensive fleet. In the Centauri operation, human strategic planning enabled a 3-week campaign to accomplish what previous estimates said would take 6 months. He removed his jacket completely and held it so everyone could see the full display. The liberation of the Centauri trade routes was planned and executed entirely by human commanders. The peace negotiations at Vorthon succeeded because human diplomats understood something that military solutions had missed for 3 years. Veltar finally found his voice, though it sounded strained and uncertain. Even if these medals are authentic, they represent isolated successes, exceptions to the general rule of human military weakness. Do they? Deho asked. He walked closer to the instructor's platform. Let me tell you about the general rule of human military performance. He pointed to a medal with a distinctive blue and silver design. This is the Tactical Innovation Award. I received it for developing new strategic doctrines that are now taught in military academies across 17 different species territories. Another medal caught the light as he moved. This is the Cross-Species Cooperation Medal. It's given to commanders who successfully coordinate forces from multiple alien species in joint operations. I've received it 4 times. But the most important one, he continued, pointing to a simple bronze star, is this one, the Civilian Protection Commendation. It's awarded when military operations achieve their objectives while keeping civilian casualties below 5% of the local population. Subin Jiang, a human engineering student, whispered in amazement. How many times have you received that one? 12, Deho replied. In 12 separate campaigns, human-led forces accomplished their military goals while protecting the people we were supposed to defend. He looked directly at Veltar. You said humans are too emotional, too merciful, too concerned with minimizing casualties. You called these weaknesses. But what if they're actually our greatest strengths? The instructor's confident demeanor was crumbling. Combat effectiveness requires decisive action, he said weakly. Mercy is a luxury that real warriors cannot afford. Is it? Deho challenged. Let me tell you about the Vorthon Rebellion, since you mentioned it specifically. He moved to the classroom's tactical display and began calling up historical data. Maps and ship movements appeared in the air above the platform. The rebellion lasted 3 years before human forces arrived, Deho explained. The Galactic Council had sent 4 different military expeditions to crush the rebels. All failed because they focused on destroying rebel forces instead of addressing rebel grievances. Images showed the devastation from the earlier campaigns. Cities destroyed, populations displaced, entire planets scarred by orbital bombardments. When human forces took command, Deho continued, we analyzed why people were rebelling in the first place. Economic exploitation, political oppression, cultural suppression. The rebels weren't evil criminals. They were desperate people fighting for basic rights. So we changed the strategy, he said. Instead of trying to kill all the rebels, we worked to address their legitimate concerns while isolating the extremist elements who were preventing peaceful solutions. Veltar struggled to regain his authority. But the rebellion continued for months after humans arrived. A proper military force would have ended it immediately. Yes, it continued. Deho agreed. But look at the casualty figures. New data appeared on the display. The numbers were shocking. In 3 months of human-led operations, total casualties were less than in any single week of the previous campaigns. We ended a 3-year war with fewer than 2,000 total deaths, Deho said quietly. Previous operations were causing that many casualties every few days. Bonhua Yun was studying the historical data with amazement. You turned enemy soldiers into allies? Many of them, Deho confirmed. When people stop seeing you as an oppressor and start seeing you as a protector, they stop wanting to fight you. Revolutionary concept, apparently. He turned back to Veltar, who was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. You mentioned the Outer Rim piracy campaign. You said humans were weak because we offered pirates jobs instead of executing them. That is correct, Veltar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tell the class what happened to piracy rates. In the Outer Rim after that campaign, Deho challenged. The instructor hesitated. They decreased. By how much? Significantly. The exact figure, please. I'm sure you remember from your own service in that region. Veltar's silence stretched uncomfortably long before he finally answered. Piracy incidents decreased by 93%. Gasps echoed around the classroom. That was an almost unbelievable success rate for any anti-crime operation. And how many former pirates were killed during the conversion to legitimate employment? Deho asked. None, Veltar admitted reluctantly. So let me understand this correctly, Deho said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. Human forces achieved a 93% reduction in piracy, while converting most of the pirates into productive members of society, and you consider this a failure because we didn't kill enough people. The instructor had no answer. Yunseo Huang raised her hand tentatively. Colonel Kim, if human forces have been so successful, why don't we learn about these victories in our military history classes? Deho smiled sadly. That's a very good question, and it's exactly why I'm here. He looked around the room at all the students, human and alien alike. Military education should be based on what actually works, not on what fits comfortable prejudices. If you're going to serve alongside human forces in the future, you need to understand how we actually fight, not how some people think we should fight. But, he continued, the reverse is also true. Human officers need to understand how other species approach warfare. The Corvani emphasis on decisive action can be extremely valuable in the right situations. Threk's tactical coordination is among the best in the galaxy. Voltar's strategic planning is remarkably thorough. He gestured to his collection of medals. Most of these campaigns succeeded because human forces learned from our alien allies and adapted their best techniques to our own methods. Yujin Kang stood up slowly. Colonel, why did you let Instructor Veltar criticize humans for so long without defending us? Because I needed to understand the full extent of the problem, Deho replied. If I had revealed my identity immediately, the instructor would have changed his behavior. I needed to see how deep the anti-human bias really went. He looked directly at Veltar. Now I know. The instructor seemed to realize that his entire worldview was collapsing. But humans are still a young species, he said desperately. You have only been in space for a few centuries. How can you match races that have been warriors for millennia? Maybe, Deho said quietly. Being young means we haven't had time to develop bad habits. Maybe our inexperience forces us to think creatively instead of relying on traditional methods that don't work anymore. He began putting his jacket back on, carefully concealing the medals once again. The galaxy is changing, Instructor. New threats are emerging that require new solutions. Species that can adapt and innovate will survive. Species that cling to old ways of thinking will not. From now on, he continued, I suggest you teach your students about actual military history, not the version that makes your own species look superior. Show them real campaigns, real strategies, real results, regardless of which species achieved them. Veltar nodded weakly, clearly shaken by everything he had learned. As the class period ended and students began filing out, many of them approached Deho with questions and expressions of respect. Both human and alien students seemed eager to learn more about actual military tactics rather than species-based stereotypes. Wu Jin Lim was among the last to leave. Colonel, he said quietly, will you be staying at the academy to teach us? For a while, Deho replied. I think there's still a lot of learning that needs to happen here. As the classroom emptied, Veltar remained behind, staring at his lecture notes. Deho walked over to him before leaving. Instructor, he said quietly, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you believed what you were taught just like your students believe what you teach them. But maybe it's time to question some of those old beliefs. Veltar looked up at him, his yellow eyes showing confusion and something that might have been respect. How do I know what to be?